One of the things you'd expect to see if evolution was correct is a very large number of unnecessary parts to a human body, and pretty much to all organisms generally. The reason for this is because if the evolution is true, we've evolved through several mechanisms, the main one being mutations, random mutations. Now, obviously there can be three different types of mutations. You can have a good mutation, a neutral mutation, or a bad mutation. If you've got a bad mutation, in theory that should be weeded out, because if it causes a serious detriment to the organism, such as the inability to breathe, then it will die, it won't be able to reproduce, and so that mutation will die out with it. If you have a good mutation, in theory, that should propagate further, so it should increase its ability to reproduce, and therefore that will become the new standard, because it will be superior to those which do not have the mutation, which will then die out in preference to this new gene. However, there's obviously the third category, which is neutral mutations. After all, in terms of likelihood, a neutral mutation should in theory be much more common than a good mutation. Simply in terms of numbers, the most would be bad mutations, then neutral, and then good. So if evolution is true, what would you expect to see in the world? Well, you'd expect to see large numbers of completely unnecessary parts of human bodies, animal bodies, pretty much everything. There should be huge numbers of it, because these would not prevent the organism from reproducing, neither would they assist it in reproducing, and therefore they'll just carry on through the whole time and not make any difference. They should still be there. Some people would point to DNA and say, well, looking at DNA, there's plenty of useless DNA, so that backs up this argument. But the problem with declaring something as useless DNA is that you have to know whether it's got a purpose or not, and frankly there's lots of supposedly useless DNA which actually we're discovering has a purpose all the time, every day. New discoveries are being made and they're finding out that what they thought was useless does actually have a purpose. So I think that should be binned and put to one side, because not knowing something does not mean it's useless. So the most effective way of looking at it is to look at the human body. Generally we can look at things and clearly see whether they've got a purpose or not. Not always, as I'm sure most people would like to comment and say, you've got the appendix which is useless. It's not useless. We've discovered recently, we just didn't know what the purpose was. It does have a purpose, it's in immunological defense. Some people would also point to the one particular nerve which runs down from the human body in a loop. And they can say, well, that's unnecessary, look at that. In theory, the nerve could go straight to it. But literally, that's the only one which people generally point to. The appendix, as I've already said, does have a purpose, and there's very little else which people can say doesn't have a use. Now, if evolution was true, I'd expect there to be an enormous number of these sorts of things. Nerves, capillaries, blood vessels, useless organs, all things which are completely pointless, don't harm, don't help, but have been carried along. But this isn't what we see. We see, amazingly, just such an extraordinary efficiency in organisms that there is virtually no extraneous, unnecessary parts whatsoever. The parts which are there, which we don't know the purpose of, or we don't know why they're designed in the way they are so few. I think they're exactly that. It's not that they don't have a purpose, it's that we just don't know what it is. Whereas if evolution was true, you'd expect to find a plethora of organs, growths, all sorts of things which are totally and utterly unnecessary, but that isn't the case. And so it totally undermines evolution. And one or two things that we don't know what they do, are pretty much the best that we can come up with. So I guess that's my question to evolutionists. Where are these neutral mutations? Where are these hundreds and hundreds of neutral mutations which just occur, that don't help, that don't hinder, which produce useless things in animals, in plants, in human beings? Why is it that everything has a purpose in our bodies?